You're listening to Within Tolerance, a podcast for a machinist by a machinist. I'm your host, Dylan Jackson of Protea Machining, and this week I am rejoined by Jeffery Lowery of Lowery Racing. So welcome back.
Thank you. I'm glad to be on. Glad to be back.
So for anyone who wants to hear your backstory, the last episode you were on was all the way back in 75. So head back, listen to that one. You can hear how he came to be Lowery Racing and making awesome wheels. So what's been going on I think it's been almost a year since you've been on.
Yeah. So the last time I was on, I believe I had just left my previous full-time employment. So now that was just a little over a year ago. So just over a year of being self-employed, and not a lot has changed to the shop itself. We are shopping for new machines right now. We still have our same machines, but the team has grown. So when the last time I was on, I had just become full-time, and now my girlfriend / partner in crime is also full-time in the business. She's a machinist as well. And about 3 months ago, we hired a full-time machinist that was working for us part-time there. So now we're up to 3 full-time people in the business, and we're rocking and rolling, keeping the spindles turning. So overall, that's kind of the fundamental difference from the last time. And so business has been great as far as the sales have continued to improve, and we're developing new products, and right now, the vast majority of our business is still within flat track motorcycle racing. Since Neil is our machinist, since Neil's come on, we've taken some more time to try to diversify a little bit into some other job shop work that's outside of just motorcycle racing. Who knows what the economy is going to look like here in a couple of years? So we want to be diverse just a little bit anyhow. But anyhow, right now, the shop is out of space is our big limiting factor right now. We have 3 CNC machines. We have, all the fun goodies to go along, everything from a manual mill, manual lathe, surface grinder, surface plate, welders, the whole 9 yards, all within a 1,200 square foot pole barn. So it's pretty tight with 3 people in here, but we've already done the vast majority of the excavating. As soon as the weather breaks in 2022, we're going to do a shop edition and triple the size of our shop. So that's kind of the next real big step for us, but just kind of rocking and rolling until then.
That's killer. That's really cool. Because the last time we talked, I think you had just either were seeking approval or had just gotten approval for like your new style of wheel too, right? From the Racing Association?
Yeah. So essentially, to kind of step back a little bit. So flat track motorcycle racing, it's dirt oval tracks on motorcycles. And it's pretty unique. It's the only motorsports that I know of where heavy rear wheels can be beneficial. So not always, sometimes depending on the track, depending on the surface, depending on a lot of different factors, sometimes a light rear wheel is helpful. Sometimes a heavy rear wheel is helpful. So before us, the only real way to have a heavy rear wheel was an aluminum wheel with weight essentially designed into it. Almost as a joke, it started as we were like, whoa, what if we bolted some steel weights to the outside of the wheel, like underneath the tire kind of thing. So the professional flat track sanctioning body here in the United States of America is called American Flat Track. And their rule book read that you were not allowed to add weight to your wheel other than the minimum requirement in order to balance the assembly. That's because people were doing some kind of redneck dangerous stuff back in the day. They were adding water to their tubes and, adding 1,000 of the like stick on wheel weights and stuff like that. So they had put that rule in place. Well, I came up with this clean, efficient design to bolt weights to the outside perimeter of the wheel, again, under the tire, so it's completely concealed, and brought it to them and said, hey, I understand why that rule is in place, but what do you guys think of this? And they really liked it. So what it does, and my pitch to them was purely that, hey, look, it's an affordable solution for the small guys. So it's going to help all the lower budget teams out there. And they bought it, and they approved the design. But really fundamentally, it's been a big advantage because the steel weights around the outside perimeter are exactly where you want the weight. The larger diameter you have the weight, the more gyroscopic effect you have. American Flat Track does have a weight limit in place. So your entire wheel assembly, brake rotor, sprocket, tire, the whole 9 yards has to be below 43 pounds. So, that 43 pounds could be all in the center of your wheel at your hub where you're not going to have much gyroscopic effect. Or in the case of our steel bolt-on weights, it can be right around the outside largest diameter. So it was a big advantage because it is a more affordable solution to have multiple different wheel weights, wheel options, but then it's also a legitimate performance advantage over our competition. So that helped a lot with us getting in with some of the bigger teams who already had a big pile of wheels from our competition, and it really gave us a good conversation starter to get in with. But yeah, since last fall they did approve our design, and yeah, they even wrote it in the rule book that approved designs only are legal. And to the best of my knowledge, we are the only approved design. So that's been a big win for sure.
That's epic. That's like, I mean, you couldn't have asked for a better approval process.
Exactly. Absolutely.
And have they been selling as well as you had hoped now that it's all approved?
Yeah. The short answer is yes. So in American Flat Track, the top premier class is limited. It's there's a lot of politics at play, but essentially this year there were about 13 people in that top premier class, and of those 13 top flat track racers in the world, we sold to 12 out of 13 of them. There's only one top guy that we did not sell to in 2021, and a lot of those sales were this bolt-on weight assembly that, like I said, it's a legitimate performance advantage. You can get more gyroscopic effect by having the weight out there on that outside perimeter.
That is so cool. So since we are on the topic of flat track, one of the questions we got from Lual Sindor was, has the business taken away from your amateur driving career? So are you still racing? And if so, how do you find the time?
Yeah, so I'm still racing, and long story short, so I started this business the beginning of last year, and I thought I was done racing, like seriously. And I had a lot of success with racing growing up. I won the most prestigious award that can go to an American flat track racer in 2013. It landed me on the cover of 2 national print magazines, including the AMA magazine. So I had a lot of success, a lot of momentum going into my professional career. And ultimately, after winning that award in 2013, I turned 16. You're allowed to turn professional at 16. And a lot of my competition actually went to homeschool to finish high school, and was really invested in becoming professional motorcycle racers. And I did not take that path. My dad was very persistent that I went to college, and I'm not gonna I'm positive, negative, whatever is what it is. It's gotten me to where I am today. And so I raced professionally through 2019 and had a fair amount of success as a privateer. As a weekend warrior, we had a lot of good performances that I'm proud of. But in 2020, I said that, we're starting this business, and I'm going to set my racing career to the side. And ultimately the plan was like, I'll still run local races. I have, some good bikes and everything, but ultimately my mechanic, who's in Columbus, about 45 minutes away from me, he had some of my bikes at his house and ended up getting them together. And we went to one specific race in 2020 that there was a little bit of money up for grabs, and I hadn't been practicing and hadn't been riding. But long story short, we showed up, and there was some non-negligible competition there. We'll put it that way. And we absolutely smoked the field. It went better than I could have hoped for. And after that, it was like, man, the itch is there. Like, we talked, we sat down, we talked, and we said, hey, in 2021, so this year, if the business lines up to where I can leave my full-time job and be full-time self-employed, then we'll get I'll get my professional license in 2021, and we'll go racing. And we did that. Long story short, we had an okay year, nothing too impressive. Unfortunately, I didn't have as much time to invest as I would have hoped to. At the beginning of 2021, I was still the only person in the business. So I didn't have as much time to prepare as I was hoping to. We had some good success at some of the smaller local races, but on the big professional stage, I don't think we really had the bikes to compete, to be up front. But long story short, now that there's two other full-time members on the team, and the business has more resources and I have more time to be able to step back and ride on the weekends and train, we're building two new bikes this winter, and we're going to run the full professional series next year. So there's three classes in American Flat Track. We're going to be racing in the production twins class. So the bikes we're building are actually, they start out as Yamaha MT-07 street. It's the engine and electronics put into a purpose-built flat track frame, some awesome Lowery Racing wheels on it, and other components that we'll be making. But they're pretty unique motorcycles, and we have more connections in the sport now than I've ever had before, and more resources than we've ever had before. So ultimately, we're hoping that next year shakes out to be our best year yet.
That's super cool. That'll be a ton of fun. And MT-07, I had no idea that you guys took street bike running gear, more or less, or powertrain, and put it in a flat track. I didn't realize that was a class at all.
Yeah, so like the bikes that I've been racing are Kawasaki Ninjas. I have two right now. So it starts out as a Ninja street bike, again, different frame, so on and so forth. But when we built these bikes, it's been 5 years ago, 6 years ago, the rule package was significantly different than it is today. Just as things progress, different spec fuel, different sound requirements, so on and so forth. And it's just not quite as strong a platform right now as the Yamaha is. So we're gonna dive into those, and it helps a lot with product development. It helps a lot with customer relations, and I think that's why we've been able to come in and be as successful as we have in this industry. Is that not to toot my own horn, but we really are industry experts. We're able to talk to our customers, and it's not just some theoretical, well, I was told this, but I'm actually able to communicate, well, on this track, this specific track, it feels like this, and these style bikes, it does this, so on and so forth. And the vast majority of my customers understand, respect, appreciate, whatever you want to call it, that are very involved in racing as well. And ultimately, the next big step for the business, which we're trying to improve some of the foundational structure of the business first before we dive into this, but the next big step is street bike wheels, street legal wheels. And I'm hoping, planning, pitching it, whatever you want to call it, that's how we're going to be able to penetrate into that street bike market. It's definitely a more saturated market than flat track racing is. There's a lot more competition, but I think that the customer base is going to respect the fact that we're not just some random machine shop trying to make a penny. We eat, sleep, and breathe motorcycle racing. Whenever I'm talking with other motorcyclists, they're very interested in all about the racing stuff. And I think that creates a lot of opportunity to build connections and build a fan base, so on and so forth. And so, yeah, we absolutely plan to lean into our racing program. I don't think it's going to happen in 2022, but bringing my mechanic on as a full-time employee is certainly a plan in the future, hopefully early 2023. And ultimately, once I'm done racing in a few years, we hope for the race team to be in a position to where we can hire a full-time racer and really continue to be involved with the sport at a high level, both for product development and, advertise, just the whole 9 yards. It really fits in with our business model.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I mean, it just, having products come from a race team legitimizes the whole thing. So that totally makes sense.
Absolutely.
So talk to me about dealing with all this growth. I mean, how has it been to not only hire yourself, but hire others and deal with, HR stuff and payroll and all of that? How have you dealt with that?
Yeah, it's been a wild ride. It's been fun. And, I say this not to complain at all, but I work a lot. I live 100 yards from my shop, and it is very, very rare for me to be in the shop less than 100 hours a week. And it's a labor of love. I love what I'm doing. And I think that's why we've been able to grow so quickly. Not tooting my own horn that, I'm so great because I work so much. But, at the end of the day, it takes manpower. It takes effort. It takes a lot of labor. And, there's a lot that goes into it to be able to build a sustainable process. It by all means, there are a lot of great machinists out there, but but to bring someone on as a machinist and have a process and a product line in place for them to actually be able to make the business money efficiently takes a lot. So that was a lot of the work at first. And when it comes to hiring employees, I will say, look, we're all right. This isn't a big negative, but it was definitely there's more strings, more things at play than I was originally expecting, between the couple $1,000s a year for our, workers' compensation policy. And we wanted to be a competitive employer right off the bat. So we do have a group health insurance policy. We offer health insurance, and we offer a simple IRA. And, between trying to keep up with between the taxes, the wage taxes, the social security, the extra insurance, so on and so forth, there's a lot of expenses to an employee above just their hourly rate, and then it's been fun. It's been a challenge, but it's a matter of, I think, doing my advice, looking back, and I think we've done okay with this, but just trying to really lay the foundation from the beginning to be correct in a sustainable kind of way. We jumped into Gusto as the payroll service that we use, and like they handle, and I mean, pardon my ignorance on the subject. I don't know if this is a national standard or if this is an Ohio thing, but in Ohio, it's a 941 filing where you file for essentially your employees and pay your taxes and such. But Gusto handles all of that. So there's a lot of upfront work, putting in all your information and then getting into the government sites and approving Gusto to be your representative or whatever they call it there. So there's a lot of upfront work to that, but once that foundation is laid, it's really not too bad. Our paychecks go out every other week, and I get on and approve the timesheets, and Gusto handles the vast majority of the rest of it. And I have to go in and pay the health insurance bill once a month, and file for the simple IRAs every two weeks. But it's really not too bad. It's kind of intimidating at first. I talked to several other business acquaintances that they were able to help out, and I guess when it comes to stuff like that, and as a general rule of thumb that I've definitely found to be true, and advice that I would give to anyone else, is that you don't the University of YouTube is super, super helpful. And, you can learn a lot on Google, but oftentimes it's a whole lot faster and a whole lot easier to pick up the phone and try to find an expert, that's willing to help. And, even if, when it comes to filing LLCs and getting, operating agreements in place to where everything is secure from a liability standpoint and everything, picking up the phone and calling a legal office can save you a lot of time, and they can answer a lot of questions very quickly. So, I was able to lean into some of my other business resources, and they pointed me in the right direction and got everything set up. So it's fairly smooth now. I do all of my accounting work through QuickBooks and then payroll through Gusto. And then my mom actually has an accounting background and a business degree. So it's only been, I don't know, 4 or 5, maybe 6 months now. We started doing a monthly accountability accounting meeting kind of thing where at the end of every month, I print off our profit and loss sheet and go sit down with my mom, and we kind of have an hour conversation about how the numbers are looking and why they're looking that way, and making sure that everything is categorized correctly and so on and so forth. So, as an entrepreneur, you don't have to be an expert in everything. You just have to have the right resources to be able to know who to talk to and know who can help you.
Yeah, definitely. Gusto, whatever is what I went with as well. I'm actually still a good cautionary tale is I went full time at the beginning of this month, but I thought I had all my ducks in a row as far as, I had already signed up. I had gotten all my account stuff mostly done. And I was like, oh, I'm just waiting to pull the trigger. And then I got to it and I was like, oh, these state documents apparently take 4 to 6 weeks. And so I'm still sitting waiting. I'm like, okay, this is great. I thought I had done all my due diligence to get all this done. And then, it turned out I had forgotten to, click a few buttons and send some things out. So yeah, there is a lot to know and a lot that I don't know. And like you said, it's really, really helpful to pay people for their expertise.
Absolutely. And it's kind of the story of the whole world right now is everything's just a little bit slower than it otherwise would be, and everyone says, "Oh, sorry, COVID." So yeah, it's definitely a good point there that things take time. I think as a hungry entrepreneur, you get in this mindset and you get used to the idea of like, oh, this needs done, I'm going to do it. And I don't care if I have to stay up until 3 a.m. It's going to be done tonight, and it's going to be done right, and it's going to be awesome. And then like you get to dealing with outside entities such as our lovely government, and it's like, oh yeah, 6 weeks maybe we'll have it done. And
Right.
It's just kind of painful.
Yeah, it was definitely a wake up call of like, oh, I think deep down I probably avoided some of it because I was so not, I guess nervous might be the right word, but like I was, like standing at the cliff's edge kind of thing. And then I was like, oh yeah, I've looked at the water. It's good. And it was only on the way down that I was like, oh no, I didn't actually look as far as I should have. So,
Right.
But
yeah, and I mean,
yeah.
I think that there's definitely, a lot to be said there. I think a lot of people kind of shy away from the whole notion of like jump off the cliff and learn to fly on your way down. And, of course you have to be responsible and everything with the entire situation. But I think that there's a lot of utility to that in a way, as far as it's so easy to stand back while you're working your 9 to 5 and be like, oh, I'm going to figure that out someday. Like, oh, we'll get to it someday. Whereas once you really commit and jump, things come, if you find a way to make it happen a lot quicker than you would have otherwise. And it takes a level of bravery. It takes a level of commitment, but that's all part of the fun game, right?
Definitely. Yeah. It remains fun for sure. So you had mentioned at the beginning you're looking at machines. So let's talk machines. First off, you currently have a Herco. Theo Shift asked, he wanted to know more about them in general, user perspective. He hears a lot about Brother and Haas, but not too much about Herco. And I think you talked quite a bit about it in episode 75. But just as like now that you've had more time under your belt, how are you liking your machine?
Yeah, overall, I love the control. It's super, what do I want to say? Robust, I think would be the best way I can describe it. I love the tool library. I love how, it's straightforward. You don't need 16 clicks to upload a program. You don't need 45 clicks and 16 manuals and everything to figure it out. It's pretty intuitive. I wish there was more online content and such about them. I think that, so it's no secret, I'm no fan of Haas. I own we have a Haas ST10 lathe, and I don't think I'll ever buy another Haas machine in my life. But what they do right is marketing and educational content. If you have a question about a Haas, you can find it. And, a lot of that is from outside sources that are not Haas, such as, my previous employer. But that's also not by accident. Like Haas makes sure that happens. So overall, I would say I love the machine. I wish there was more online content. Our local machine tool distributors called Reynolds Machinery, they've been able to answer my questions and been super helpful. We've had a couple small little problems under warranty. Like we had a screen go bad. Didn't take the machine down. It turned purple. Like you could still kind of faintly see what was going on. It is a touch screen, but they quickly replaced it at no charge to us. So on the Herco, the door lock, and I don't know how they get away with this, but the door lock does not lock unless the machine is off. So
Really?
Right. You can, right from the way it was delivered, we didn't have to make a door key. We didn't have to override anything. You can run a program with the door open. You can do manual tool changes, whatever you want to do. So the only time that the machine locks the door is when the machine is off, which is weird if you ask me. But the door lock quit working. So the machine was locked shut. It wouldn't release when you turned it on. So I I opened up the side door, like this just bolts, right? So like I opened up the side door and climbed in there with a cutoff wheel and cut off the key and got back to making chips. So I was definitely cussing Herco in that moment, but you know, overall Reynolds has been great to work with. The machine's been solid. It's a dual contact spindle, which I think helps a lot. And it's definitely a beefy machine. So yeah, I'm happy with it. It's been good, mainly because of machine configurations. Our next machine's not going to be a Herco. Doing a lot of shopping there, looking around. It's going to be an early 22 purchase. So we're not in a big rush. And I will say it's been a lot of fun. You know, the machine nerd in me has really, really enjoyed it because like so essentially my dad has an old 1997 Clausing vertical machining center in the shop. Very old. The machine's older than I am by just a little bit, but it has a FANUC control, good enough machine, very simple. And long story short, when we started this business, you know, using that machine, I had this big backlog of orders, couldn't keep up. And then we started having machine problems. The control was having some communication problems. We actually had the bearings go out for the ball screws. So it was kind of like, we have this big backlog of orders and you know, we're having machine problems and we can't keep up anyways. We need a new machine. We need a new machine quick. And I talked to Haas and wasn't super happy with how that went, and talked with Reynolds Machinery, and it was like, here you go, awesome financing deal. You know, our things worked out with a financing company that I connected with for an awesome financing deal. It was like 2 weeks from the time I signed the paper to when the machine was on the floor. Like it was in stock in their Indianapolis facility. So Herco could be quick, fast. I was impressed with the machine specifications. I was impressed with the price tag. So it was like, you know, show me where to sign. And at the time I was working a full-time job. So I didn't have a lot of time to have machine salesmen come to the shop. And I didn't have a lot of time to go visit different showroom floors and such. Whereas this go around, we're really taking our time because it's not as clear what machine configuration would be best for us either, which we'll get into here. But in the last like month, we've talked to 4 different machine tool manufacturers or their distributors. And I tell you, that's really been enjoyable and helpful and all the above. And I'll tell you, a couple months ago, before we've really dove into this process, you hear stories about how, you know, I don't think anyone's claiming that IMTS is growing, right? Like that these machine tool manufacturers are kind of reducing their efforts towards trade shows and such. And as you know, someone who's relatively new to this space, it was always kind of bummed to hear that, right? Like I'm looking forward to my first IMTS this coming fall, and I really couldn't quite tell you why that was a good idea. But after going through this process, I guess I get it now. Having the resources and attention of these machine tool salespeople and having the application engineers there to answer your questions and being able to go to their showrooms and see their machines and such has been super helpful. I mean, for example, Doosan is one of the manufacturers that we're talking to. Well, Ellison, the distributor for Doosan. And I was on their website and it was like 8 a.m. I submitted an RFQ through their website for some of the machines we were looking at. And so 8 a.m., they had a salesman in our shop, like on our floor talking to me 2 p.m. that day. So
Wow.
like he was in the area, like coincidence, whatever you want to call it. But to be able to actually have an expert in your shop and talk to you about what's going on, and especially when you know a situation like ours where we're not real sure what's going to be best for us moving forward. We've learned a lot, and then like we just spent a day with our local Akuma distributor, Gossiger, and spent a day down looking at their machines and talking to them. And like we toured. So one of the machines that we were looking at, they didn't have on their showroom floor. They have a huge facility. They didn't have that specific machine, but a local shop actually just had one delivered like months ago, brand new machine. So they took us over to that shop. So we were able to actually see it running a job and talk to them, talking to, you know, owners, not just Akuma salespeople, but to be able to see everything and then we went back to their showroom and they provided lunch, and we sat down and talked with one of their application engineers and had parts sitting on the table and watched videos and talked about machines. And it's been super, super helpful. So I guess that would be advice to give as well, that, in some situations it's pretty clear. Like if you are, working a job right now and you're running a VF2 and you love the machine, and your local Haas distributors or HFO is awesome, and so on and so forth, then it probably makes sense to buy the machine that you're familiar with and what you know. But if you don't know what you're getting into, submit an RFQ, make a phone call, send an email, and they're quick to help. And some companies more than others, but I think it's also helpful there because it shows you who's going to be there for you in the long run and who's going to help you out.
Definitely. So you mentioned that your requirements for a machine tool have changed, or that they're evolving. What are your requirements this go around that you're looking for?
Yeah. So the next machine we buy is going to be a lathe. Originally, so we make wheels. We have a lot of lathe work. Right now we have a Haas ST10 6-inch lathe. It's way too small for the parts we're making. Even our hub parts, it's too small. And then it's just a 2-axis lathe. All of our hubs then have to be run across our Herco as well. And it's fairly straightforward work for a live tool lathe. So definitely looking for that upgrade. Then when it comes to the turning work for our wheels, right now we're not doing any of that in-house. So we're looking at what it would take for us to insource that, and what would be best. And originally we were thinking a big horizontal lathe, because big enough that we could efficiently run our hubs as bar work. Our hubs start out as 4-inch bar stock. And then a machine that is big enough to fit 4 inches in the spindle is also big enough to turn the wheels that we're making right now, which are the maximum diameter on them is about 20.25 inches. But after really diving in and looking at all of our options and talking to machine tool people, we don't think we're going to go that direction. A vertical turning solution would definitely be a lot better for our wheels. And when it comes to our hubs, essentially, and this was kind of a surprise to me and definitely a learning curve, but essentially the machines that are big enough to bar feed 4 inches essentially don't come out with an option for a sub spindle or a dual spindle. Doosan makes some machines that are really big that, could bar feed that and have a sub spindle, but really big footprint, very big machines, much bigger than what we would otherwise need. And of course, there's some mill turn solutions, but for various reasons, we don't think that that's the best solution for us right now. So we were originally looking at a big horizontal, and as we're diving into this, we started shopping around for a rotary forging supplier. So essentially where we buy our wheels from right now, they're good, but essentially they won't sell them to us without having the lathe work already done. So they're forging and turning them, and then that's the product that they're selling. There's not very many people that offer that, and they're having their fair share of supply chain issues just like everyone else. So, that's also motivation to kind of insource it. There's a lot of factors at play there, of course. So anyhow, we started looking, and I fully understand that we're a small fish in a big ocean, but it's been tough to find a good rotary forging supplier that's interested in working with someone as small as we are. And we've gotten far enough to actually get prices out of one company so far. We're a couple months into searching high and low for a good rotary forging supplier. One place has got back to us, got all the way to the point of giving us a price. And with their minimum order requirements at play, it's going to be a 6-figure order.
Oh, geez.
In order to order rotary forged wheels, which I was expecting a big number. I was not expecting 6 figures. So, the kind of question, then it comes into play of like, oh, what's our best long-term solution? And if the best solution is a vertical turning solution for our wheels, and the best solution is a dual spindle setup with a Y-axis for our hubs, then maybe we should go ahead and buy a smaller, more robust dual spindle live tool Y-axis lathe now, because we don't have the floor space. Our sales are very quickly getting there to justify it, but for the position we're in, to drop over $100,000 on material that's going to sit on the shelf is a lot for us right now. So we think we're going to kind of hold our breath on that and move forward with a more robust, smaller lathe for our hubs. And then that gives us a little bit more time to develop the business. And ultimately, it might be a situation where we want to buy just a simple vertical turning lathe in the future, or it might be a situation where we want to buy a 5-axis, more of a 5-axis mill turn, that because for our turning of the wheels, we don't have a real high RPM requirement. Like a lot of these 5-axis machines that are big enough to run our wheels will have 600 or 800 RPM turning maximum RPMs, but for a 20-inch part, that's okay. So ultimately, hopefully, if the cards fall into play, this could still be a 2022 purchase, but go ahead and moving forward with a smaller lathe that's going to be the best long-term solution for our hubs in the short term, and then kind of holding our breath on the other, on our other needs right now until we can until the cards fall into place a little bit better. And I think we'll be able to make a better decision on whether we want a simple 2-axis VTL or a more complex 5-axis solution. So that it's been fun. There's been a lot of really good, fun, helpful conversations going on around that. And right now we have 3 CNC machines by 3 different manufacturers with 3 completely different controls. And it's not that bad. And to add to that, our next machine is not going to be the same as any of the ones we have. So moving forward, we're going to have 4 machines, 4 different manufacturers, 4 different controls. So ultimately, in the long term, we don't want that trend to continue. So we're looking to try to make a decision now for what's going to be the best solution and have the most options for, where we're going to be in 3 or 5 years down the road. And, it's kind of that situation where I think that a big horizontal could be our best short-term game. But if we're going to, take a step back, and if we were to look into this business as an investor and say, hey, what's the best long-term solution? We think a more dedicated hub lathe would be better. And it's going to be super helpful because right now, from a machine perspective, our bottleneck is the Herco, is the mill. And I don't know, probably 35-40% of what the Herco is doing are making
what
hubs.
Could be subspinal. Yeah,
exactly.
That makes sense.
So it's gonna, buying this lathe is going to be essentially like buying more Herco as well. And then we have a lot of simple lathe jobs, such as everything from custom one-off wheel spacers for different wheel applications for customers to different little drive pins and such that we're going to keep the Haas just for a simple lathe solution there, and then have the dual spindle lathe for more robust jobs. And then, as I mentioned before, we're trying to diversify a little bit with our job shop work, and we think that having that more robust lathe is going to help us out in the short term of pursuing job shop work to kind of get into a little bit different ball game there when it comes to what we can quote jobs for and what we can pursue.
Totally. So are you shopping like the Puma 2600 versus like the LB 3000 or?
Yes. Yep. And I don't have the machine models here in front of me, so I'm not as robust with all of the numbers as I probably should be at this point in the game. But and part of that is because we've been looking at several different manufacturers. But yeah, ultimately looking at the dual spindle lathe, we're looking at probably like a 10-inch chuck on the main spindle kind of size machine. And yeah, and ultimately another big learning curve that we kind of came to the conclusion of, we were hoping to be able to run our hubs as bar work, but when you really look at it and consider the parts catching solutions, there's not a good way to parts catch our hubs because they're, from a machining perspective, they're not that complex, but there's a lot of relatively sharp corners on aluminum. You can't drop it. There's a big 2.5-inch thread on one end of it. You can't drop it into a parts catcher because it's going to be dinged up. So ultimately, if you're not going to be able to, part it off, then, and of course, you could part it off and to where it's just barely hanging on and the operator can reach in and break it off. But ultimately, if you're not going to be able to run that in an automated solution, then a smaller lathe that can't necessarily do 4-inch bar work is still going to be just as viable. And even, with the subspindle to be able to be one and done is going to be an even better solution. Whereas some kind of robotic arm could be a very, I think relatively simple implementation in the long term, which I'm sure someone just cringed there that I said a robotic arm was going to be a relatively simple implementation. I understand that robots and simple don't go together, but in the world of robotics, what we're doing is not that complicated, not that heavy, not that big when it comes to our hubs.
Yeah, well, and relying on it just for unloading kind of takes a lot of the real hard part of like, properly loading and dealing with all of that. Like the bar feeder and your internal lathe automation should take care of, or all of the like the big problems will be pushed off to the bar feeder and the internal automation, the lathe, sub spindle chucking and all of that stuff. So
Right. And just to be
yeah.
clear, when talking about going to the smaller lathe, unfortunately, we still will have to be loading the slugs. But going to the smaller lathe, it's not going to be big enough for the 4-inch bar to fit in the spindle. So it will be loading material there, but still overall, I think it's relatively doable from an automation standpoint. So yeah,
Totally.
looking
Well, I
forward
know
to
that like Akuma has some 2-axis like lathe loading robots even. So like, a lot of those companies have built-in automation solutions you can buy.
Absolutely. And the local Akuma distributor, Gossiger, has a very robust robotic department. We got to tour their facility, and they're doing some very impressive things that are way above what we're doing here. So yeah, there's definitely experts out there that would look at this as a simple job.
Well, that's really cool. Yeah, I hadn't even really thought of a VTL for your rims, but that or your wheels, but that sounds like it could really work out well too if you end up, getting to the point where you want to drop 6 figures on material.
Absolutely. And we're in a position where right now our mill is sufficient for what we're doing, but as we get into street bike wheels, the diameters of the wheels increase. Clear up to 32, 34 inches is really about as big as they get. And right now we have in our Hergo, we have 20 inches of travel in Y. So there's not a real good solution there to make a 34-inch wheel. So that's where, obviously the 5-axis capabilities really open up the design possibilities and efficiencies when it comes to making complex 3D surfaced awesome wheel designs. But then also if we go buy a VTL and great, we have the capabilities of turning these larger wheels, well, we're going to have to turn right around and buy a big mill as well in order to machine those big wheels. And it's like, well, are we going to buy a big 5-axis because that's the best long-term solution? And ultimately, even if we sell 1,000 wheels in a year, like there's going to be a lot of extra capacity for a VTL at that point. And we're really not in a position to get a lot of job shop work for our VTL because those are going to be big parts, right? So our wheels in the world of VTLs, our wheels are very small and light parts. Whereas, if we were to pursue that kind of job shop work, you're talking, you need an overhead crane, you need a loading dock because semi trucks are going to be picking those up and dropping them off. And those are things that we don't have right now. We live on a dirt road in the middle of nowhere. So when thinking about buying just a VTL, there's going to be a lot of extra capacity there. And right away, there's going to be a need for a 5-axis mill. So if we can kind of hold our breath long enough to where we can afford, justify, whatever you want to call it there, a big 5-axis mill with turning capabilities, then I think that's going to be, from right now, from what I've learned, I think that's going to be our best long-term solution. But like I said, not going to be our next machine. And that kind of gives us more time to feel things out. It's a fun conversation to have and fun things to think about. But at the end of the day, I really don't know how quickly we're going to be able to penetrate into the street bike world. So like, just for reference, I've talked about street bike wheels a fair amount. We have everything in line. We know the boxes we need to check to be able to sell DOT compliant street legal wheels. And right now we're we're kind of going through a revamping of our flat track wheel product line. We're actually going to be kind of publicly pushing it over the next couple of days, publicly announcing it for the first time, probably, well, before this podcast is released, most likely. So right now I've been kind of all in on that. And then as soon as that is kind of up and stable, then we're going to be diving into street bike wheels. There are several independent wheel testing facilities across the country. We've spoke to one up in Detroit a few times here over the last couple months and have everything lined up there. So at this point, it's really just a matter of machining wheels and getting them off to be tested, to be certified. So when we jump into that, like to put some reference into it, like this is technically our first full year in business in the flat track world. And the quantity of wheels that we've sold is in the hundreds. With street bike stuff, I don't know if we're going to sell 20 wheels next year. I don't know if we're going to sell 2,000 wheels next year. So being able to jump in and really kind of feel out that market and what we're going to be able to accomplish is going to create a lot more insight as to what machine's going to be best for us moving forward. Whether we're going to go buy a $500,000 5-axis mill turn or a $200,000 simple VTO.
Yeah, that completely makes sense. You don't want to count your eggs before they've hatched.
Right, absolutely.
Another question we had, you're talking about working 100-hour weeks, was from Make Tech, and he said he wanted us to talk about motivation and discipline. It's something that he's working on. I think a lot of entrepreneurs deal with it. Any insight into how successful people keep crushing it long term is worth hearing.
Yes. So I'm a big fan of Gary Vee and Andy Frisella and Jordan Peterson and, on down the list, kind of the outspoken entrepreneurs and psychology types and experts, whatever you want to call them. So definitely something I think about and pay attention to a fair amount. I guess I would say, first off, don't believe all the Instagram hype that everything's perfect all the time. Everybody has bad days. Everyone has days that, look, for the most part, I love what I do. I don't have to push myself real hard to work hard. On the other hand, there are certainly mornings where hitting the snooze button is more appealing than getting out of bed. And I guess what I would say, and I have found, and I would say that I'm very fortunate for the industry / business model that we have, is I find it very motivating to get out of the shop kind of thing. Like, I, when I go to a big race and I see and talk to all these different racers and see all the products out there and talk to all these, other racers and team owners about what they need and what they're doing. And then, look up at the stands and see 10,000 people in the stands that are all, interested in motorcycles and most of which have street bikes and kind of see, they're looking at bikes with our wheels on it and they're seeing everything. And I'm thinking / hoping that they're going to be interested in street bike wheels, and to actually be able to get out of the shop and see that and be involved in that and be immersed in that, I find to be incredibly motivating. This is the off season, so I'm not going to say it's kind of worn off right now, but it's kind of worn off right now. So, during race season, when we get to go to the track and get home on a Monday morning and get to work, it is kind of a peak for me. So I would say get out of the shop, talk to people. I definitely suggest some kind of, accountability partner in whatever way you might be able to manifest that at your point. I've listened to the Business and Machining podcast from the beginning of it, and I've found that to be very interesting and helpful and insightful in a lot of ways. And look, I don't agree with everything that they said, but at the end of the day, like one example there, it's been, probably 6 or 8 weeks ago, I actually reconnected with what was my 8th grade science teacher, and he had left the teaching profession and has since become a financial advisor. And like, we went out to lunch and had some good business conversations, and we've met up a few times since then and really kind of got to talk some of the nuts and bolts with someone who knows business, isn't necessarily an expert in this industry, but knows business. And I found those conversations to be incredibly motivating, to actually be able to get your ideas out of your head and have people challenge you, you know, not just be your mom or your significant other that's like, oh yeah, that's awesome, that'll work no matter what, like you're the best. But to actually have someone, you know, say, well, what's your contribution margin on that? And you tell them, and they're like, you don't think you could do a little bit better there? You know, to actually be able to get in and have conversations about what's going on there can be very helpful. So I guess my advice for motivation and discipline and such, I would say, if you have a hard time staying on track from a discipline standpoint, you're going to struggle in the long term. Like, you know, it, if any of our competitors aren't as dedicated to motorcycles and machining as we are, we're going to run them over because we love what we do, you know, figuratively in business. That's not a threat of violence. So from a discipline standpoint, I would say if you have a hard time staying on track, then you should keep searching for what's right for you until you find something that you don't have a hard time staying on track with. And from a motivation standpoint, like, look, there's definitely days that are better than others. And I've found getting out of the shop has definitely been motivating in a lot of different ways. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. Every time I talk to somebody about either the business or machining, like either of those, you know, I've got a few friends in town that are all machinists, and we chat occasionally. I've got a few friends through Instagram that, you know, we DM back and forth and stuff. But those kind of conversations really light a fire and make me excited to keep doing it. Like, I know, like you said, every day is not sunshine and roses. There are some days that you wake up and you're like, I just don't want to be here. Like, not that I don't love having a company or love machining, but like there's some days that you just, you know, you wake up on the wrong side of the bed. I would say, as far as like motivation and discipline, there are like some hacks you can do too. Like, one that I heard recently that I've tried and that I really like is just do one thing. So like, you know, if you're dreading, I don't know, doing the dishes or something, just tell yourself, I'm just going to wash one dish. And like, then you're like, well, I'm already here, forget it. Or like, you know, I'll tell myself on days where I don't want to go to the shop, well, I'll just go in and like pick up that mess you created yesterday. And then like when I get in there, I'm like, well, I might as well turn on the machine and start doing some stuff because I'm already here. Like, I've already made the track. All right, I'll just get some stuff done. And so it's just like about it. You know, motivation is kind of like that speed hump. Like you just have to give it enough gas to get over it, and then it's all easy from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, as an entrepreneur, it's easy to kind of forget about your taking care of yourself as well. Like all like, so I don't know, it's been like, I don't know, 6 or 8 months ago. As I said before, we live out in the middle of nowhere, and we found out that Grubhub delivers to the shop, and we were super excited about that. And we've spent a lot of money with Grubhub since then. And look, there's some benefits there, you know, to be able to keep working and not have to cook. But you got to take the time and be self-aware to take care of yourself, both from a physical and, you know, diet and exercise standpoint, but also the, you know, the mental standpoint. And I guess along with your hacks there, something that I think about a fair amount is kind of like, I don't know if you want to call it like intentional procrastination or what, but there will be times where it's like, okay, we're going to the anodizer on this day, and I know X and Y need done before that day, but I really want to do Z right now. And I'm really motivated to do Z right now. And I'll tell you, like, you know, as I spend a lot of time thinking about kind of like overall work efficiency and, you know, trying to make the most of the time. And there's a big difference when you want to do something versus when you don't want to do something. You know, you work faster, you walk faster, you talk faster, you're more efficient. And there's a lot, of course it's a slippery slope. You can't put things off that need done, but if there's times where it's like, man, an idea comes to mind and it's like, oh, I really want to make this change to my wheel program right now, or whatever that might be. And oh, that would be cool. And I'll go do it because I'm interested. I'm in the moment, and you know that state of mind really matters. So I think there's an important takeaway there that to be honest, I didn't realize growing up and wasn't necessarily taught to me, but over the last couple of years, I've definitely come to see it to be true, and not just from the online motivation guys. But efficiency matters, and successful people are really efficient. I think that was so before I worked at Saunders Machine Works, I was working at Parker Hannifin Corporation in Wadsworth, Ohio, and they were, as far as a big corporate workplace, they're awesome. I was very happy with my job there, but because I was relocating and, all things considered, I left there to work at Saunders Machine Works. And in the big corporate world, you can get away with a lot. You can have days where you're not very fast. You can, anyhow, the people listening know what I'm talking about. Everyone has that coworker that's not very productive. And in the small business, there's really not nearly as much room for that. And when I started at Saunders, I was very impressed with the efficiency at which John works. I think in the wrong context, it can be taken the wrong way, but I will say this purely from a positive perspective. The man gets a lot done. He walks fast, he talks fast, he's efficient, and that matters. At the end of the day, in business, like, we don't have a big shop here, but we have a lot of capabilities. There's a lot of stuff that we can do, but at the end of the day, like, we have monthly bills to pay, and how much money we make is related to how fast we get things done. Like, knock on wood, I've been super thankful, super grateful, but we have never, since starting this business, we have yet to catch up on orders. Like, we have had a legitimate backlog of orders since day one. And I'm talking, well into the 5 figures. So a legitimate backlog. And ultimately it comes down to how fast can we move product? How fast can we get things through the door? So on that motivation and discipline topic, just being really self-aware of your state of mind and how to get the most work done as efficiently and quickly as possible is ultimately going to be a huge factor in determining your success.
Yeah, I think that's really well put. And focusing, I think, on the right efficiencies too. Like, I see a lot of companies kind of flail around not taking the time to like really track like what efficiencies mean. Like, I know, I had Pete on from Chatter, and like what I liked about his machine metrics is that they don't just track machine uptime, but they try to dive more into like what's causing these downtimes. Because I mean, I've been a part of a poor implementation of trying to track machine uptime, and like I've literally heard, as I'm, handing over reports to like their bosses, the machinists say, well, I can just, turn my feed rate down to 50% and turn rapids down to 1. And all of a sudden my machine numbers look really, really good for the rest of the week. And it's like, the trick is to really know, I guess, how to inspire people to want to be like personally efficient, and not just like try to be like, oh, well, my machines were on for 20 hours, so I'm super efficient, clearly.
Absolutely. And there's so many buzzwords along that line, when it comes to Kaizen and lean manufacturing and so on and so forth. And I think it can definitely be twisted in the wrong sense. I think more often than not in the big corporate worlds that happens. But, I think there are certainly people that do it right and do it efficiently. And, someone like Jay Pearson talks a lot about it and has a lot of very helpful information about it. But yeah, there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. And even the successful people that say, oh no, Kaizen and lean, all those buzzwords are not helpful. But if you actually look in their shop and look under their hood, they're very, very efficient as well. They just call it different things.
Yeah. Well, I think it all comes down to implementation. Like, a rigid implementation of 5S or lean or whatever is always going to cause issues eventually. Like, you'll get through all of the stuff you need to 5S, and all of a sudden you're just throwing away stuff just to say that you did one of your S's. And so really it comes down to like keeping that human aspect in any of those plans, and realizing like, but actually, speaking of Kaizen, or, I guess 5-second Kaizen, like Paul Akers has the whole thing where they do a 30-second improvement every day. But that's one thing that since going full time, I've been trying to do, is like at the beginning of the day, I try to get my improvements done right off the bat, because that really does spike my motivation. Like, it's like, oh, I got that done. There's a project off my list. Time to start machining. Like, today, I noticed yesterday one of our chip the trash cans was splitting and was like everything was overflowing. So first thing I did today was go to Home Depot and buy one of our nicer ones that we're trying to switch them all over to, and dumped it all into that. And I was like, all right, sweet, I got my checklist done. I did something good for the shop, but now I can get to working.
Absolutely. And I've definitely so when you're working a full-time job, there's a lot of things that get put off, and it's like, oh, I'm working hard, I'm super busy, but there's just so many other things going on. I'm going to put off this improvement to a later date, so on and so forth. And I can, after a year of being self-employed, I can say that doesn't really change. I found it to be incredibly, I think difficult can be taken the wrong way, but it's been incredibly difficult to really make the time for those shop improvements. And, there's several projects that we've moved forward with over the last couple months that I've kind of had ideas for since day one, but just hadn't got to it yet. And man, if I could go back, I'd slap myself upside the head and say do that sooner, because it helps a lot. I don't know if you just heard that background noise come on, but that's a great example of that. We actually built a homemade wheel polishing cart, little cart lathe, whatever you want to call it. So as you can imagine, the wheels are a little bit larger through, either from when we're being shipped the wheel blanks themselves, or when, we're handling them, or even post machining. It's not uncommon to get little scratches here and there on the aluminum. We've tried very hard to avoid that, but inevitably there's imperfections in the world. And these scratches will show through the anodize when you look closely. So our current product line is for off-road use only. We literally, our customers are putting these on gravel racetracks and beating them up. So a full polish to a mirror before anodize is not appropriate. The amount of time and cost would not be justified for this product line. But the wheels, before, we were hand scotch biting them around the outside perimeter, because the scratches are fine when they're concentric with the wheel. If everything lines up with the wheel after anodize, it looks good. If something is not concentric with the wheel, it shows, and you notice it when you look closely. So we were doing all of these by hand, and it was like the job that everyone dreaded in the shop. And ultimately, it's like, well, if you had a big lathe, you could just spin it in the lathe and, hold a piece of Scotch-Brite against it, kind of thing. But that would be a huge manual lathe to go purchase, and a lot of floor space that we don't have, so on and so forth. So we welded together a frame and then mounted, I don't know, it's either a 3 or a 5 horsepower motor to the bottom side of this. Essentially, it's a table, and then it has a motor mounted to the bottom of it with a pulley over to a shaft. The shaft comes out, sticks out the side of the table, and you can mount a wheel to the end of it. And then we just have it set up with a VFD. So it's like a super redneck little wheel polishing lathe thing that has been a huge help. Like, it improves product quality. It greatly improves a job that no one liked to do. So yeah, we should have done that a year ago, but it's just an example of like what we were talking about, where it's so easy to put these things off and like, oh, what we're doing now is 60% of the way there, so we're going to get it out the door and I'll make that improvement tomorrow. But I would definitely advise myself and anyone else to be very deliberate about trying to get those improvements done. Just like you were saying, a little bit a day helps a lot.
Yeah. Well, and to come full circle back to efficiency, like, you will always end up more efficient at the end of the month. Maybe for that day you lost an hour or whatever, but overall, if you kind of step back a little bit, that efficiency goes way up because you're no longer fighting that thing.
Absolutely.
So you said you had some questions that rolled in on your Instagram as well. What do you got?
Yeah, so to clarify, a lot of these questions are kind of questions that I came up with for you as well, not just from Instagram, but I guess, so we've certainly had our fair share of supply chain problems. What about you guys? Have you seen any major problems or delays, and how's that all looking for you guys?
Not a ton. Actually, I was just talking to a friend about this the other day, because most of my orders are, I don't know, 5 to 20 parts. maybe max. Like we've had a few production runs in here, but for the most part, it's all small quantities. And I don't know if it was in the middle of COVID or before COVID, but I started getting a lot of my material from McMaster just because they might not be the cheapest, but they were super consistent because our local supplier for aluminum is less than great. Let's just say that. Like they would promise that it'd be done, and then Brad would go down there. They would literally text me saying your order is ready, like through their automated system. Brad would go down the next morning, call them, say, "Hey, I'm out in the parking lot. You can bring it out." And they say, "Oh, we still need to cut it." And it's like, no, you said it was done. Like that's not how this works. Or they, it would take 5 or 6 emails back and forth to place a simple order for like 3 different part numbers and 3 pieces of each or whatever. So something that should take one email of like, quote me this, quote approved, please proceed. And then, so I just started going to McMaster and then cutting the stock from, foot bars or 2 feet bars. And they are, probably the best in the game at sourcing things. So they always have stuff in stock. And realistically, they're not that much more expensive. And most of my customers seem to be willing to bear the cost of, whatever I source from them. I've started using some other suppliers online that I found that are much better priced, but much longer lead times as well. So like if I know I have some time in the job, they seem like they are on top of it. But I think thankfully, due to the small size of our orders, we really haven't seen that super delay. Like I've seen more delays in, I guess, tooling, I would say, and parts. But for the most part, like material shortages haven't really affected us, thankfully.
Right.
What
Yeah,
about you?
I mean, nothing that has completely brought everything to a halt by any means, but we've certainly experienced some delays with our wheel blanks. And then like the one example that I have in mind, we do we make some custom parts for some of the bigger race teams that are, building more custom specialized bikes and such. And we're able to help out with that. And Alro is our go-to material supplier. We've actually been using McMaster more as well. We're big McMaster fans. They're awesome. But we reached out to Alro to buy a 12-foot bar. This was a couple weeks ago. We reached out to buy a 12-foot bar of 2-inch by 4-inch 4140 hot rolled. So not that common of material. And Alro is a big supplier. And they're like, oh yeah, well, we can have that for you by the end of January. It's like, yeah, that's not going to work. It's like, what about a size bigger, like 2.5 by 4.5 or anything like that? They're like, oh no, we're out of everything that's even close to that. Like we're just totally out. We have cold roll for you though. So we ended up getting cold
No.
roll, but it was definitely an eye opener. Like even if Kroger doesn't run out of bread, if Walmart tells you they're out of bread, like that's kind of a concerning. And it's a similar situation with 2024 aluminum 3 3/4 inch 12-foot bars. They said end of December they're not going to have any until then. And we were able to find another source for that, but it's definitely kind of eye-opening, cringeworthy, whatever you want to call it. And yeah, hopefully things stay stable over the next couple of years. But that's kind of definitely been some of our motivation to kind of get outside of just the motorcycle industry to diversify with some other job shop customers. And we've had some success doing that so far. But yeah, crazy times.
Yeah. Another thing that affected us was now that I'm full-time and Brad is starting to spend more time there because he's ready to go full-time as well, really. We wanted to build another shop computer, and parts for that are like, he just built us the one that we use currently for CAD and CAM either a few months into COVID or just before. And now if we wanted to build that exact same computer, and granted, these are all like, it was all like used eBay parts and like fairly, I wouldn't say behind the times, but they weren't like bleeding edge components. It still would be almost double what it was to build it.
Yeah, absolutely. When Neil came on there a few months ago, he's a computer guy way more so than I am. We bought the parts and he built the computer that he's using primarily, and I use it for the more complex CAD CAM and video editing. But when we built that, we have, I don't know if this is a chain store and they're everywhere or if it's local, but a computer store called Micro Center down the road from us. And we went there and, with the list of parts that we wanted. And long story short, they had everything except the graphics card that we were looking for. And like, I guess the graphics cards are super hard to find or get right now. And they're like, oh, well, we get some delivered every whatever Tuesday afternoon. So you can come at that time and see what we have. But that it's super, super hard to get the kind of graphics cards we were looking for, but they had some better ones. So we ended up buying like it was like $1,300 graphics card or something like that. So of everything, the graphics card on that computer is not the weak link, but just because they had it on the shelf and it was a easy, we were ready to build a computer. So that was what we got. So yeah, that's definitely kind of across the board. It was what we've seen it with some motorcycle parts. I placed an order several weeks ago for some Tungaloy cutting tools, and then found out after I placed the order that one of the tools isn't going to ship until the end of December and stuff like that, that I certainly don't think was the case before COVID.
Yeah. But if it leads to more onshoring, I guess that's a good silver lining for all of this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Parts made in America don't get stuck on cargo ships. That's for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah. So another thing that I have a note of here that I've certainly been thinking a lot about on our end and curious to kind of get your input, but to kind of take a step back, when Neil came on a few months ago, it really gave me an opportunity to kind of step back and work on the business more than just in the business. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners can relate, but I love spreadsheets, and I really dove in and started figuring out the metrics for the business of tracking our weekly sales, and tracking what we're selling of our products and what we're doing for custom motorcycle work and what we're doing for outside job shop work. And then sooner rather than later it's going to be what we're doing for street bikes, and kind of keeping an eye on that on a weekly basis, and having all of our expenses tracked. Like I can tell you to the practically to the penny, because things like electricity are a rounded guess, but I can tell you what our monthly expenses are, and what that looks, what our rough contribution margins are for our different products. Or I'm sorry, I shouldn't say rough contribution margins. I can tell you what our contribution margins are for our different products. And we're able to kind of compare that against, what our expenses are, and really start to see some of the different performance metrics of the business, and looking at our gross contributions per hour and such like that. That in contribution just being kind of what you're making above the direct production costs, above what you're making, what you're making above the material costs and any direct cutting tool expenses. So doing that has been, I would say, super helpful to really see under the hood of the business, and how things are going and what we're actually making and where we're actually going. And I've definitely been thinking a lot about the shop edition and 5-year plans and what we're going to be doing and what's going to get us there. Do you track any metrics closely in your business? Do you follow, and of course, I'm not asking for any specific numbers or anything, but I guess, loosely, how well do you know the numbers for your business? How well how much do you use those numbers to make the decisions? And with that, what direction are you wanting to go for your 5-year plan? Like where do you want to be in 5 years with those numbers?
Well, to kind of answer most of them, I know my numbers very poorly. The whole, at the beginning of, was it this year or sometime last year, I started paying our bookkeeper to supposedly close our books and give me monthly P&Ls so I could have those numbers, because I just don't have time. Or at the time, I didn't have any time to do any of that work. And they've done kind of a poor job of that. And so I'm currently kind of shopping around. I really like them for our taxes. Like they're really knowledgeable and they kind of know what they're doing. But as far as understanding a manufacturing business and not asking me about what I consider pointless questions and just getting through it, like, I thought when we had set this up that I had made it very clear, like, oh, file all Amazon expenses under just shop supplies. And then I get, emails, oh, I need you to categorize these 20 Amazon purchases. And I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. Like, I don't have, that's the whole reason I'm paying you, is to not have to do this kind of stupid stuff. So yeah, to answer your question, I don't know my numbers very well. I'm trying to, now that I have the time, kind of get through my backlog of things that they wanted me to classify, and then hopefully get a year's worth of P&Ls that are now more or less pointless to me. I mean, it'll be cool to see how the year has gone, but it was, the whole point was to have my books closed 3 days after the close of the month, so that I know where to steer the ship. And at this point, uh, I know we're doing well. Like, I know that we've done significantly better this year than we ever have, just from gross sales. But as far as the rest of that, I just unfortunately don't know it. And I definitely have a little bit of, I guess, shame and anxiety about that as a business owner, and not knowing my numbers, because I know how important that is. So that is something I'm actively trying to rectify.
Yeah, and I can say that 6 months ago, certainly when I came into the business full time, my answer would have been very, very similar to what you just gave. And kind of to circle back around to the motivation and discipline side of things, I personally have found it very motivating and confidence inspiring, and just all of the above, to be able to confidently say, like, I can look at the numbers and say, hey, we did, this is what we brought on this week for new orders. This is what we shipped this week. This is our current backlog, and I have it all graphed against what our weekly expenses are. So like I can see those numbers, and I tell you, I totally understand where you're coming from, but I've come to enjoy it a lot more than I was expecting that I would have. So yeah.
How are you pulling all that data into the spreadsheet? Are you manually inputting it, or do you have some kind of link?
So I've certainly played around with like the Shopify API, and to be able to actually pull orders into the spreadsheet manually. But we're fortunate, and I would say we're very fortunate in the sense that we don't have a high quantity of low value orders. We have a low quantity of high value orders. Our average order value is several $1,000s. So most of the time, I would say getting our Shopify website up has been extremely helpful. It has greatly reduced the number of questions that I've had to answer, which there are still plenty of funny stories of customer interactions. Things can get challenging there, but I would say the website has been very helpful, but I've still manually been handling the orders much more than I was originally expecting. So most of the time it's still, the dad of a fast amateur calls me and says, hey, this is what's going on. This is what bike we have. These are the kind of tracks we're trying to improve on, so on and so forth. What do you think? And I end up saying, oh, I would suggest this, this, and this. We talk everything through. I have a notebook in front of me taking notes. And then ultimately I get, oftentimes I just have them text me their shipping address and email address. And then I manually create the order on the backside of the website and, email them an order confirmation and an invoice. And that, I can't say that I love that, but I think it's going to be that way for a while because of the way our business is structured. And in that process, we've found that we pretty much still have to keep a spreadsheet of our orders, because it allows us to see, hey, what wheels do we need to make right now? What hubs are they going to need? What colors are they going to be done? And what are other notes? Hey, this guy said he wants it for this race. We need to deliver it by this date, so on and so forth. Or this guy said, like, we don't have wheel spacers on our website. This guy said he's running this frame with this brake setup and he wants these wheel spacers. So that needs to be tracked in a place that our team can access that. So we do that in spreadsheets, and I'm very open with the numbers about the team. Like, I'm not trying to stick it in a spreadsheet that they don't have the password to or whatever. So having all of our orders already in the spreadsheet, already manually keeping track of that, makes it a pretty smooth transition, to essentially we have a big order list, and then that, one of the columns for that order list is kind of the category that falls under, whether it's, our standard flat track product lines, whether it's a custom flat track part, whether it's, non-motorcycle related job shop part. And essentially I can just select which category it fits into based on a drop down. And then on another, financial analysis page, it then sorts the totals, just based off of math that I've put into on the spreadsheets. So I'm manually inputting a lot of the data, but it's not like I'm going way out of my way to do this once kind of the foundation was set up. And then, yeah, and again, kind of consolidating it all, because even if, again, I have a page on the spreadsheet that I've set up with the Shopify API, but that's some pretty thick data to get through. It's not real easy for someone like myself who has no programming experience. So, but even if that was all set up correctly, that still doesn't account for, XYZ big race team just called me and has a rush job for, a several $1,000 custom part. Well, like that's a legitimate contribution to our sales numbers that needs to be kept track of in the order sheet, and I want to be kept track of in our financial analysis. So yeah, everything on the input side is manual, but again, like it's rare for us to have more than 10 line items in a week for orders. So it's not a real high quantity, if that answers your question.
Yeah. Have you considered ERP?
Yes. Yes, I definitely have been down that rabbit hole several times on online searching. And I think right now what we're doing is sufficient enough. And I am fairly confident that building our own ERP within the next couple of years is going to happen. I was at Saunders Machine Works when he started the whole Lex implementation, and Grimsmo does his own ERP, and Pearson does his own ERP. And I've certainly looked at some off-the-shelf solutions, and I don't know. I don't have a good gut feeling about it. And, maybe there's an ERP expert out there that can sit down and change my mind. But from everything that I've seen, everything that I've read, everything that I've heard, I just don't have a real good gut feeling about that. And what I'm doing with the spreadsheets right now appears to be sufficient. I would say at the time being, I have set up a spreadsheet that does some like traveler sheet work order generation kind of thing. And, as a part of the financial analysis of the business, really trying to quantify how much time it is actually taking us to make different parts, and where we're losing time, so on and so forth. So we do have some sheets that I'll print off, and like we have a whiteboard that we do Monday morning meetings, and one, whatever you want to call it, paper holder on the whiteboard is for our work orders. And a lot of the smaller, especially the custom stuff, like we're not doing work orders for everything, but our standard jobs right now, we have a work order sheet that we print off, and then whoever's running that job will take a note of how long it took them to set up and how long, roughly how long it took them for the entire job. And I've explained it very clearly, tried to explain it very clearly to the team. Like, this isn't about me being a micromanager. I'm far from a micromanager. It's not about that. It's about understanding if we're actually taking the amount of time that we think that we're taking to make parts. It's not, it's easy to say like, oh, if things go well, it's going to take about much time to set up. And, for this part, it takes about this much time. And then you get 3 work orders back on your desk in a row that are like, oh, had major parallelism problems, took 6 hours longer than I was expecting, or, whatever. That's an exaggeration, but you get the point. It's like, oh, well, maybe we need to find a better solution for that part, because at that setup time, we're really not making much money on that part. So I've really been deliberate about trying to get under the hood of the business. And I understand that when you get into generating work orders and everything, an ERP solution could certainly be a lot more robust. But I think that the shop edition is the next big thing on the plate that will definitely needs to happen and is going to happen before we really get serious about either implementing or building an ERP of our own.
Yeah, well, that sounds like it's right around the corner too. That's really exciting.
Absolutely. So I guess kind of from those conversations, my question to you would be, if you could snap your fingers and look into a magic 8-ball 5 years down the road, what do you want your business to look like? What do you want, or your and Brad's business to look like? What do you want? What would you want your day to look like in an ideal sense?
I'm hoping in 5 years, we'll definitely have move shops because we're out of space as well. I mean, we've got 3 machines, a manual lathe, the parts cleaner, all the inspection stuff in 1,000 square feet. So I fully empathize your space constraints. And then I think our biggest focus is I need to really start working more on the business, like you've said, and create some more baseline procedures for everything. I think the first thing that's going to be worked on, I think I talked about this maybe 4 or 5 episodes ago, was I want to dial in the math behind my quoting spreadsheet to the point where Brad and I get part costs within, I don't know, $10 or something like that. Or maybe even if I can do it within 10%, I'd be happy, because then that'd at least be something. And then really we're going to invest heavily in automation. I think our next machine, if it's not a lathe because we would need one, I really want to get some kind of pallet pool 5th axis or something that I can add a pallet pool to, because for the type of work we do, I think that's going to be the best way to do it. I think that I've seen the job pool around here. I don't really trust most of the people that I could possibly hire. If anything, I would rather hire out of the community college that I went through rather than hire like a full machinist, whatever you want to call it, because I've worked with a lot of them, and I just that there's just not a lot of care out there. It seems like, at least in Tucson, like the job pool is very, very shallow. So I'd much rather train somebody up what I consider the right way rather than take on somebody with a lot of baggage, which that's not to say that you've made the wrong decision. Like, I think that you might have. It seems like Tucson, especially, and maybe this is everywhere, I don't know, but it seems like we have a lot of people who are really opinionated and don't really care about where they work or who they work for. And I don't want to deal with it. Like, I'd much rather invest in robots than people like that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, it's the way the world's going, right? We're fortunate that we're very much so in small town USA, and we're not really close to any big cities. And like Neil, our first full-time hire, other than my Gabrielle, my girlfriend, coming on full-time, him and I went to high school together. I think he graduated 2 years before I did, but we were both on the track team together. So we knew each other, we knew of each other. And, there's definitely a mutual respect there. There's a shared interest, and he's into motorcycles, he's into machining. It's a good culture fit. But I completely see where you're coming from, where it's like, if I had to if I was ready to hire another machinist right now, I would definitely be scratching my head and concerned, and whatever you want to call it, that there's not a big pool of people around that are really invested, interested, whatever you want to call it. Whereas, robots might have sick days, but at least they don't talk back, kind of thing. So,
right, exactly. Well, and like, then there's only one person to blame. Like, if a robot crashes, the finger's pointing right back at me or right back at Brad. It's not like, oh, she said this, oh, actually, I didn't crash. The machine just went crazy. And it's like, yeah, okay. Said every machinist who's crashed a machine ever. Like,
right.
So
yeah, and I guess,
I feel like if I was going to hire somebody, I would hire somebody for admin stuff too. Like, I think if I could take quoting and dealing with Gusto and, all of that stuff off my plate, that would free me up to just either work on the business and on the processes or make parts. And either of those would be a big improvement.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I would say we were fortunate in the sense that I had and have several friends that are fairly local that are interested enough that they wanted to come work for us part-time, and did work for us part-time. So, like, for example, a friend of mine that lives like 3 minutes down the road from me, long story short, he's in school for mechanical engineering right now in college, and he needed to do an internship, but he's a production employee at a tire manufacturing recycling facility, and he needed to do an internship, but they weren't going to be flexible with his hours. So there's not a lot of mechanical engineering internships that aren't, in the middle of the day on weekdays. So we were able to work it out with his college that his formal internship was actually through us. So that was the first, real employee from a business standpoint that came on. And, for it to be a fixed amount of time, he was less than full time, no benefits to worry about, no like long-term pressure on the situation. That was helpful. And like Neil worked for us part-time while he was still at his previous place of employment for probably 6 months. And really, we got to see that it was a good fit. He got to learn the process. He got to see what was going on and show that he was interested more than just in a job interview. So I was super fortunate that that worked out in that way. Whereas like just straight cold hiring someone is definitely a lot more intimidating of a process.
Yeah, definitely. So you've talked about your processes. Are there any that you've developed that you're willing to share that you found have been really valuable to, bring people on and keep production flowing?
Yeah. So I guess I would say the couple of things that I've kind of learned and would say, and first off, let me start by saying we didn't reinvent the wheel. We're just serving an underserved market. From a manufacturing perspective, what we're doing is not rocket science. We're getting better at it by all means and continuing to improve and so on and so forth. But it's not some crazy skilled, elaborate thing like yeah. So take that for what it's worth, first off. And then when it comes to the team, I think just having clarity of what's going on and the direction we're going and what we need to be working towards has been the biggest, best help so far. So like I mentioned before, I'm not a micromanager. I don't have it within me. I guess like I don't want to be a micromanager. I don't, by all means, sooner rather than later, there will be a level of management put into the business to where I'm not directly working with everybody, because firefighting is a part of the gig where here's a problem here, come fix it, so on and so forth. But I can't say that I look forward to that part of it. So having a clear picture of what needs to be accomplished, when it needs to be accomplished by, how the business is doing, what the pulse is of our customer base, what our current backlog is. I think when the team understands those things, they are much more ready and able to make decisions themselves. And, people make mistakes. It happens. Like you said, it's unfortunate and frustrating and all that you want to call it for when an employee makes a mistake and costs a lot of money and breaks a tool or whatever. I think it takes, you have to step back and realize like, oh, hey, I might not have made that exact mistake, but I probably would have made a mistake as well if I was doing it. So I don't have any room to be, mad, as long as it's in, that there was, of course, there's a lot of stipulations to that they have to be making a valid attempt to make good parts. But overall,
a good faith mistake is okay.
Exactly. Just overall creating that culture of, it's okay to make decisions by yourself. It's like, if you make XYZ decisions because of XYZ reason and it's in good faith, like I'm not going to be mad. If it doesn't go well, we'll talk about it and what could have been better, and it's going to be a learning experience. But really just trying to invest in the employees from that perspective of trying to have a good, competent, effective team. And, Jay Pearson talks a fair amount about he wants everyone on his team to be a rock star. And I think that very much so pursuing the same kind of direction of, like, for example, my mechanic was coming to me and, oh, here, well, we need to buy one of these. We need to buy one of these. Here, what about this? What about this? What about this? And ultimately, I just gave him a business credit card. And it's like, hey, look, run any big purchases by me, by all means. But you know what it takes. You know what we need. You know what direction we need to go. And really empowering people to make those decisions is my approach to building out a good team and continuing to build out a good process. I think I mentioned earlier, we do Monday morning meetings. So right now our structure is Monday morning meeting. Friday is company lunch, and then after lunch we spend Friday afternoon cleaning slash shop improvements kind of thing. And on our Monday morning meetings, we have a whiteboard, and one part of that whiteboard is a list of Kaizen projects of improvement projects, and it's kind of like one project at a time, but at any given time everyone has a project, everyone's trying to make an improvement. And that's, I guess, hopefully that kind of answers your question of the direction and the approach that we're taking for building out the process and the team.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. And I like the Monday and Friday, meetings and lunch. I think that more companies need to push that. Like, I know I've dealt with a lot of employees in the past that see meetings as useless and just a waste of time. And like, to their perspective, they certainly can be if they are just like perfunctory meetings that are not accomplishing a goal. But I think having genuine check-ins with everybody in the company at least once a week is super, super important. Like, Brad and I usually go to lunch as well on Fridays and like talk about like, oh, here's how the week went. Here's what orders we have. I mean, we talk about other stuff too, but like it's mainly just to like kind of summarize the week and get on the same page.
Absolutely. And like what we talked about before was as far as the motivation and discipline side of things, like your state of mind really matters. And employees are not excluded from that statement by any means. That, if the team's in good spirits, if the team's excited about work, then the team's going to be more effective. So really trying to be deliberate about that.
Totally.
So the last question I have written down here, where you're at now, do you have any advice for yourself looking back, say from when you started, when you were buying your first shop, buying your first machines, really taking off from the very beginning, where you're at now? Could you look back and give yourself any advice?
Oh man. Well, the first one that sprang to mind, I think, is often said, and I hate to like be that person, but like it will take much longer than you think, but like it will also at the same time it'll get there super quickly. Like when we started the business, I think we both had aspirations of like, oh, in a year we'll be full time, and then like we're going to be making money hand over fist, and 2 years after that, and like, I just went full time, and this is our 6th year. So like it took some time to get here, but like now I can feel the snowball is going. It's going downhill and it's creating that avalanche, and like we've really picked up the momentum we need. And I think for us in our company, we have done it right, where we both feel very comfortable with the business. We have all the support equipment. We feel comfortable taking on the kind of work we're taking on. And I'm very glad we built it how we did. But yeah, I think that we were young and dumb and had no experience in this and just kind of assumed that work would fall from the heavens for us, I guess. I don't know. But that's kind of the first thing that came to mind was, yeah, it it will not happen all at once. But looking back on it, I was like, oh, of course it took this long, and this is the perfect amount of time, and I'm happy with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that answer. And when you think back to taking on work and taking on new customers and such, do you have any advice for yourself or others for maybe the work that fit you, the work that didn't fit you, and or how you were able to acquire new customers?
As far as acquiring new customers, literally just talk to people. Like, all of our business has been word of mouth. We have never done any advertising. I mean, I guess you could qualify the podcast as advertising, but like I've never paid for advertising. Every single one of my customers I've either met through Instagram or in person or through a friend or a family member. So it's just talk to everybody. Like, be excited about your business and share that excitement, and people will want to support you and then find avenues to support you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I guess the other big piece of advice I would tell myself is like, don't sweat it too much. Like, I remember the first time we were late on a job, and like we were there. Actually, I don't know if I've ever told this story. So there was a job that we had for a local customer who I had gotten through a friend who worked there, and he was one of their engineers. And it was the first time that we did not deliver an order on time. And we we were working on it, and then all of a sudden the kitty went down. I think it was the control board that we ended up fixing, and we could not get it booted up. And then we went to Brad's day job and worked till like 4 a.m. that night trying to get these parts run. And it was machines we weren't used to and tools we weren't used to. And I think we ended up like completing half the order or something. And I just had to text my friend and say, hey, here's this situation. I feel terrible. I'm so sorry. Like, we're going to be at least a week or so late because we just have to get these parts in for our machine so we can get them done. And he was like, yeah, no sweat. Don't worry about it. Won't be an issue. And like immediately, relief just washed over both of us. But it was one of those things where like I had built this up as like, they're going to leave us, and then all of our other customers are going to leave us, and you have to close the shop. And like, you tend to, as a small shop, or at least I do, build these things up to like crazy amounts of stress when you might be one of 40 vendors that your customer has. And like, they've dealt with setbacks before. Everybody has, and like they'll deal with it. Like, yeah, I guess just don't sweat don't sweat the big stuff. Like, stressing out that much about anything doesn't help anybody, and just communicate openly and honestly with your customers, and it'll all work itself out.
Absolutely. Yeah, I like that, and there's definitely a couple examples that come to my mind along those lines. It's just, I've definitely seen, like what you're saying, where there will be situations where maybe things didn't go just right with an order, and anodize is late, or you get a part back from the anodizer and it looks horrible, and the customer really wanted it, and so on and so forth. Or, another good example is one of the part-time friends that we had brought on pretty early. It wasn't working out, and again, I'm not a micromanager, so I can't say that I handled everything perfectly of spelling out exactly A, B, C, what the expectations are. Look, you're 40% short of this expectation. No, it like just straightforward. It was not a good fit. And you build it up in your head of like, oh, this is going to be horrible. And, I'm not going to share too much about it, but long story short, ultimately it all came to the point where I had the conversation with the guy, and he's like, oh yeah, I get it. It's not a good fit. It's all cool. We're cool. Have a good day. So it's like, man, I just, I lost sleep over this, and like, it wasn't that big of a deal. It's definitely easy to build things up in your head, for sure.
Yeah. Almost nothing I've ever done has ever been as hard as I think it's going to be. And man, if life was as hard as my mind made it out to be, it would be really tough. But like, it's a pretty good life. Like,
Exactly.
Well, that takes me to the last question I ask everyone, which is, what did you research this week?
Yes. So it's funny that I just gave examples about anodized problems. We are all in on insourcing anodize. So essentially the plan was get the shop edition done and then insource anodize. But the kind of adjustment to that plan is, let's build a small anodized line, stick it in the corner, learn, grow, figure it out before we're ready to build a big anodized line. So that way we know what we're doing. We know what to look for, so on and so forth. So I have done a lot of research and spent several $1,000s on stuff for our first anodized setup this week. So overall, it's kind of intimidating from the outside looking in, because it's like, what is anodize? It's a lot different than spray paint, that's for sure. But overall, it's like anything. You get into it, you learn, you make a few phone calls. We're pretty fortunate. There's essentially like an anodized. There's a company in Ohio that supplies anodized products. And again, one of those deals, you send them an RFQ, a sales guy reaches out to you, answers a bunch of questions. In this situation, they're even nice enough. Oh yeah, since it's your first order, we'll throw in some free stuff, so on and so forth. So that has been the big thing on my plate right now. I guess another fun project that was really last week that I dove into. So I had briefly mentioned before, we're kind of revamping our wheel product offering. So right now we offer a front wheel design and then 5 different rear wheel designs. We call them R1 through R5, where R5 is the heaviest. And then on any of the R2 through R5 designs, you have the bolt-on weight option as an upchargeable option. And we've really, I would say, struggled to build and maintain an inventory. And we have a lot of material costs. We have a lot of labor put into our products. So having some huge line of products on the shelf really isn't a good option for us. So insourcing anodized is going to help that a lot. But then B, simplifying our product line. So essentially, instead of all of those different iterations that I just explained, what we're moving to is a light wheel design, a medium wheel design, and a heavy wheel design. And all of our medium and heavy wheels are going to be bolt-on weight compatible. So just kind of an adjustment through all that. And there will be a slight adjustment in prices with this change based on the fact that our material prices keep going up and up and up. But in that, I wanted to start serializing our wheel products, the wheels themselves, doing serial numbers. So I got to write my first macro variable program and dive into that and wrote a serial number program last week that counts up the serial numbers one by one. So that was a lot of fun and researching that. But yeah, it's just kind of a continuous learning process at this point.
That's really cool. I look forward to seeing how the anodized line comes out. I've talked to a few people now that have done that, and it seems like it works out. Like I think I hyped it up to be a lot harder than it actually is. Not that it's not, doesn't take some work, but it seems like if you're halfway competent and can, do some research, that you can figure it out.
Absolutely. And we think that there's going to be some opportunity there as far as contracts, job shop type work there in the future, that certainly we're going to get everything figured out and dialed in with our product line first. But that building that anodized line is priority number one when the shop edition goes up. And the plan is once we have our processes dialed in, that we want to offer some fast turnaround, reliable, good anodized services for the area here as well. I I honestly think that I've talked to just about every single anodizer in the state of Ohio and had many of them do test parts for us, and I've been very, very disappointed. We're actually using an anodizer on the other side of Pennsylvania right now. It's about 6 hours away from us. So, we have fairly big products. Like the shipping or transportation costs are eating us up. And still for them, a standard turnaround time is 2 weeks. So to be able to in-source and have a fast turnaround, more reliable quality, that additional contribution to our product line as far as from a financial perspective of not having to pay someone to do it, we're pretty excited for it. And then once we have that figured out, to be able to offer fast turnaround, reliable anodized services, I never want our anodized line, for the sake of our own products and for any work we do for customers, I never want it to be like, oh yeah, we'll get back to you in like 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, maybe 6 weeks. I would much rather, advertise standard 3-day turnaround, optional 1-day turnaround, upcharge kind of thing. So from job shop perspective, we want to be able to offer that. And there are several people I have in mind that I will certainly be reaching out to once we have that dialed in, that I think could be very good potential customers.
Excellent. Well, I'm really glad to hear that all that's moving forward.
So
very cool. Well, in closing, Patreon thank yous, Josh, Norman, and Jordan. Thank you guys so much for joining the Patreon this week. It helps keep the show going and lets me have awesome interviews like tonight. And thank you again for joining me, Jeffrey. I appreciate it. And see everyone next week.
I certainly appreciate you having me on, and good luck to all the fellow machinists out there, and we'll keep on throwing chips. And thank you for the great conversation.